So for this video, I'm going to be discussing my top 10 favorite Stephen King movies of all time. Now I'm going to reiterate that and say favorite because these are not the objectively best Stephen King movies out there, but they're my favorite. And this list was also incredibly hard to accumulate because he has so many damn movies. A lot of his books have been adapted into movies, TV shows, made-for-TV movies, you have it, whatever, miniseries. But yeah, these are my top 10 favorite. And then I'll mention some honorable mentions. And don't be mad if your all-time favorite Stephen King movie isn't on here. It probably isn't. Maybe. I don't know. But these are my top 10 favorites. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So I'm going to go in chronological order here. Like these aren't like in like numerical order, like number 10, number 9. But I'm going to go in chronological order, except for my number 1 pick, which I'll say for the very end. Probably a lot of y'all know what it is already, if you've watched a lot of my content, especially from the earlier days. But I'll save that one for last. But I guess for number 10, if we want to number it, but really it's just chronological order here. One of my all-time favorite Stephen King movies is the very first one, Carrie, from 1976. This movie is really great, and this is one of the movies that really put Stephen King on the map. The book came out in 1974 and was quickly released by Brian De Palma in 1976. Really great, especially for 1976, because sometimes you can go back and watch older movies and they don't really stand the test of time. But I've seen this movie several times. I think it does. It also funnily has John Travolta in like one of his very first movies before he got really famous with Grease and Saturday Night Fever and all that stuff. This is one of his, if not his first movie. But yeah, overall, this movie is just really good. It's also a fairly faithful adaptation. It's kind of hard to adapt Carrie like correctly, if that's even the case, because a lot of it is told in a epistolary style, which is like, you know, diary entries and news journals and stuff. So it's not really, like, you can't get it 100% accurate, but like the main gist of the story, Brian De Palma did excellently. And yeah, it's a really good horror movie. The next one I'll talk about came out in the 80s, one of the scariest movies for me personally, and that would be Kujo. And I say scariest because I think with Stephen King, he's at his scariest when he does realistic horror. Like stuff like it's not really like scary for me. Because like I know it's not real, but like stuff like Kujo could theoretically happen because it's like a rabid dog. Like that could happen to you. And this movie is pretty terrifying. Like it's basically just, you know, basic setup of a mom and a son getting locked in a car essentially, and they can't get out because if they do, rabid dog Kujo is going to get you. And there's a lot of crazy scenes in this movie. It's really good and very well acted. And yeah, the dog in here is pretty terrifying. Like if that situation happened to you, you'd not be having a good time. And yeah, this movie is definitely one of the... So yeah, this movie has definitely always been one of my favorite Stephen King movies. It's one that definitely holds up because like I said, a lot of these Stephen King movies are a bit older, but I really think they do stand the test of time. Kujo is one that I'll watch every few years or so, and it holds up very well. And yeah, definitely one of my all-time favorites. Next movie I have to talk about, I believe actually came out the same year. And actually, if I'm correct, I think 1983, like 3 different Stephen King movies all came out the same year. And this one's very interesting because the book also came out in 1983. I'm of course talking about Christine. The book itself came out in 1983. I believe John Carpenter may have gotten like an early copy and was like, I need to make this into a movie because the movie came out that same year, which is crazy. But yeah, this one, not really a scary movie by any means, but the movie itself is just really cool. It's about a killer car. In the book, I mean, they each have their good and their bad, but I would say the book is better in a way because you get a lot more detail about the history of the car and why the car is evil and why the car is doing all this crazy stuff. But in the movie, it's just a lot of fun. Like you get a really cool looking car, goes around killing people. It's a really cool and fun concept for a horror movie. And I still think it holds up really well, especially the effects. Like, because there's scenes in the movie where, like, the car, will, like, just get totaled after killing somebody, but then it'll kind of get played in, like, reverse action where it's, like, it's healing itself, kind of. And it's the effects still really hold up today. And I think if somebody, like, were to remake this movie, it would just all be digitized and CGI, and it wouldn't look nearly as cool or well done. So yeah, it's a really cool, fun 80s horror movie. Really cool soundtrack too. And yeah, it's just one of my favorites. This next movie also came out in the 80s, I believe 1984, and that would be Firestarter. Now, Firestarter, obviously one of my all-time favorite Stephen King books. The movie itself is also very good. It's very 80s sounding and looking. And it also, if you know, the book has a young girl named Charlie McGee who can basically light stuff on fire with her mind, which is a really cool concept. And the girl in this movie is actually a very young Drew Barrymore, and she was also in E.T. at the time. I think she might have filmed this either before or after that. But anyway, very young Drew Barrymore who does a pretty good job in the movie. And overall, it's just a fun 80s, I wouldn't even necessarily call it a horror movie, kind of a sci-fi thriller kind of deal. It's really good. Charlie McGee is traveling with her dad, who can kind of push people using his mind control abilities, and they're on the run from the shop, who's trying to catch Charlie McGee and kind of harness her power. But yeah, it's really fun. Definitely one of my favorites, and yeah, that's about it. This next movie is definitely not a horror movie, but it's one of the best movies ever made, in my opinion, and that would be Stand By Me. I believe this was like 1986, maybe? Like mid-80s, I think. A lot of people don't even know that this is a Stephen King book, or it was a novella in different seasons, I should say. And the novella in question is actually called The Body. So a lot of people might not even put that together. But yeah, this is one of two movies that is often cited as like people finding out it's Stephen King. They're like, really? I didn't know that. I'll talk about another one later on in the video. But Stand By Me, what can I say? It's just one of the best movies ever made. It's one of the best, like, how do I say it? Coming of age movies of all time. One of the best movies involving a group of friends going on a journey. And yeah, it's just Stephen King telling a really solid, fun story. And if you haven't seen the movie, definitely check it out because it's one of the best movies ever made. And this next movie is probably, it's definitely in my top 5 favorite horror movies of all time. Now, whether it's like number 2 or 3, I don't know, but it's definitely one of my all-time favorite horror movies, and that would be Misery. Of course, Misery is my second favorite Stephen King novel of all time. And the movie, of course, I grew up watching all these movies. I should have said that at the beginning. I grew up watching Stephen King movies, and then as an adult, I started to get into his books. So a lot of these are kind of very nostalgic for me, especially Misery. I loved watching this movie, and then reading the book in some ways is even more terrifying. But this movie is just incredible, and Kathy Bates as Annie Wilkes is one of the best horror performances of all time. Like, what can I really say about this movie that hasn't been said before? I love to go back and rewatch this movie. It's one of the movies that I want Stacy to go and watch. She's seen like a few Stephen King movies, I think, but this one, hopefully, she actually didn't really like Mystery of the Book, which is hilarious. But hopefully, she would like the movie a bit better. Because Kathy Bates is amazing. She also watched Dolores Clayborn, which is on my list, but I'll talk about later. But yeah, Misery, definitely one of my all-time favorite Stephen King movies. Not my favorite Stephen King horror movie, though. That'll be coming up towards the end of the video, so I'll get into that. But yeah, Misery, definitely one of my favorites. And then, also not a horror movie, but widely regarded as one of, if not the best movies ever made, would be The Shawshank Redemption. Also, a lot of people don't know that this movie and book, or novella, I should say, is a Stephen King product. There's a really funny story of Stephen King kind of walking into town in a grocery store, and an old lady kind of approaches him and says, "Hey, you're that Stephen King guy who writes all those nasty horror books. I hate those. I love uplifting stories like that Shawshank Redemption." And then Stephen King's like, "I wrote that." And she's like, "No, you didn't." So it's really funny to get people's reactions when they figure out that Shawshank Redemption is Stephen King. And it's one of the best stories ever told, one of the best movies ever made. Not really much I can say about it. that hasn't been said before, but it's awesome. If you haven't seen it, go see it. I've watched this movie several times. This might be my most watched Stephen King horror movie, or Stephen King movie, I should say. It used to come on like cable TV all the time, and if it was one of those movies, like if it just pops up, like I would just watch it. Like, oh, Shawshank Redemption, I'll watch it. But yeah, I've seen this movie so many times. It's so good. Definitely one of my favorites. This might be like my second or third favorite Stephen King movie if I were to actually rank them. But I'm just going in chronological order here. This was made in like 1994, which around that time, a lot of great movies were coming out in like the early to mid 90s. This was definitely one of them. And then, like I mentioned, Dolores Clayborn. Again, Kathy Bates nailing another Stephen King female character. And Dolores Clayborn, again, a top 10 Stephen King book for me. Love that book. Love Dolores Clayborn as a character. And again, Kathy Bates just nails the character. The movie, while it doesn't like 100% get everything right with the book, it's really a faithful and great adaptation. And yeah, I'm just gushing about Kathy Bates here because she basically nailed two Stephen King characters. Probably two of my favorite female characters, if I'm being honest, that Stephen King's ever written. Dolores Clayborn and Annie Wilkes. But yeah, Dolores Clayborn as a movie, very good. If I were ranking these, maybe it would be closer to the bottom of the top 10 list, but it's still very good. And like with all these movies, if you haven't seen it already, do yourself a favor and check it out. Maybe read the book first, because it might make a bit more sense, but the movie is great as well. And then I also forgot to mention, there's actually 3 Stephen King movies that a lot of people often cite as, oh, I didn't know that was Stephen King. I forgot about this one. The Green Mile, a lot of people don't know is Stephen King. But yeah, I grew up watching this movie, and yeah, it's just so good. I also have the unpopular opinion that the movie is better than the book, which, a lot of people have thoughts and feelings about if the book or if the movie can ever be as good as the book. I think sometimes a movie can just be so great that it can surpass the book. Like, especially if you grew up watching the movie. Like, I grew up watching Jurassic Park, and then as an adult, I went and read the book. It just didn't hit the same. And that's kind of the deal with The Green Mile. And the Green Mile, I will say, probably of all the Stephen King, like, book to movie adaptations, it's the most faithful. Like scene by scene, it probably gets like 99% of the scenes, and it does them spectacularly. It's just one of the most faithful adaptations you'll ever see. And it's tremendous. Really great performances by everybody, really great story. Just everything about it is fantastic. And before we get to my number 1 favorite Stephen King movie, you guys can probably already guess what it is. But before we get to that, I'm going to mention some honorable mentions. I could probably list like 20 of them, but I'm just going to pick 3 random ones here. You guys might be wondering about The Dead Zone, because that's my all-time favorite Stephen King book. It did not make my top 10 favorite movies just because I do enjoy the book quite a bit more than the movie, but the movie itself is very good. Really riveting performance by Christopher Walken, but I do like the book more than the movie, but the movie is still really good. Also, oh yeah, that's one of the movies that came out in 1983. What's the other one? I think it was like The Dead Zone, Christine. There was another one, but like 80s was all laden with Stephen King material. Anyway, another honorable mention. I really wanted to put it in the top 10, but I've only seen this movie once, and that needs to be rectified, would be Dr. Sleep. I love the book, and I actually got to see the movie in theaters when it came out, and I still haven't rewatched the movie since then, which is a crime, because Dr. Sleep is one of my favorite Stephen King movies, but the fact that I've only watched it one time, I couldn't justify putting it on the list, because I've seen like all of the movies I have in my top 10 several times. So I need to go back and rewatch it a few times, and then it might get into my top 10. But yeah, Dr. Sleep is amazing. And then another one I'll throw out just as a fun pick is Children of the Corn. Definitely not one of objectively the best Stephen King movies, but it's really fun. Again, another just kind of cheesy 80s Stephen King horror movie. I love it though. Whenever me and Stacey are talking about Outlander, I'll just yell out, Outlander! which is from this movie, and it's just so funny every time. But Children of the Corn, great movie. Not like an all-time great movie, but it's a lot of fun to watch. All right, now we're getting to my number one Stephen King movie of all time. At least my favorite Stephen King movie of all time. It's The Shining, which is probably an unpopular opinion. A lot of people do not like this movie, especially, I would say the people that really don't like this movie are the people who love the book, because I will admit, while this is a great movie, it's not necessarily a great adaptation, because Stanley Kubrick, great director, one of my all-time favorites, takes a lot of liberties with this story and changes a lot of stuff, including major plot details, which I know can be irksome for a lot of people. But remember, I grew up watching this movie, and then as an adult, like a 19-year-old in college, I read the book for the first time. So I grew up watching this movie. I'd watched it probably like 100 times. One of the most nostalgic horror movies. And like I said, it's my favorite horror movie of all time. So for that reason, it is definitely my favorite Stephen King movie of all time. And like I've mentioned in a few of my past videos, The Shining is my second favorite movie of all time. Number one, Pulp Fiction. So that's the only movie that I love more than The Shining. The Shining, it's so good. I kind of want to make Stacy watch it, but I have the bad feeling that she's not going to like it. But we'll see. But yeah, The Shining, what can I say about The Shining? It's so good. It's just got that weird, like, movies don't usually scare me, but this one always just gives me a weird feeling, you know? Like, you're watching it, and it's just very unsettling. But it also kind of has the weird aspect of it, like, you can watch it as a horror movie, but there's a lot of funny moments in this movie, whether it's intentional or not. Like, you can kind of pseudo watch this as a comedy, because there's just really funny line deliveries in this movie. But it's so good. Like, The Shining is just one of my favorites. I know that's going to be unpopular, but it is what it is. All right, so that is my top 10 favorite Stephen King movies of all time. So in chronological order, I know I saved The Shining for last, but in chronological order, we have Carrie, which is from like 1976, then The Shining from 1980, Kujo from like the early 80s. It might be that other 1983 movie. But Christine's 1983, Firestarter's 1984, Stand By Me, I think it's like 85 or 86 or so. Misery is like 1990. Misery is so good. Shawshank Redemption, 1994. Dolores Clayborn, I think like mid-90s. And The Green Mile, I think is like 1999. And then a couple of honorable mentions. The Dead Zone, also from 1983. Children of the Corn, 1984. And then Dr. Sleep, my lone pick from after 2000s. I mean, there are some great Stephen King movies that I haven't mentioned. Like The Mist is really good, but that one I haven't seen as much. And also, it's not one that I go back to watch as much because it's got such a downer ending. But yeah, what other great Stephen King films are there? I'm just kind of looking up here. Like Apt Pupil, that's a kind of an underrated one. I've only seen that a couple of times. That's one I need to go back and rewatch. There's also just a lot of newer Stephen King movies that I haven't had enough time to watch. Like I still haven't seen Gerald's Game, which I know a lot of people say is really good and really riveting, but I still haven't seen that one. Pet Sematary is good, but it's not one of my favorites. Also, It, like the original miniseries I grew up watching, is very nostalgic. I wouldn't say it's particularly great though. And then the new It movies are pretty good, but again, not some of my favorites. Needful Things, that's kind of an uncut gem. I've only probably seen that movie once. That would be a fun one to go back and watch. He's also just got a lot of miniseries that are kind of hit and miss, like Storm of the Century, Langoliers, I've never seen. What else is there? Dreamcatcher, a nostalgic movie for me because that movie came out when I was a kid, but probably not a very good movie. There's also a lot of movies that are based off of like short stories and novellas that I'm probably forgetting, but those are some extra movies I'll mention there. But yeah, my top 10, let me know if you agree or disagree with any of my picks here. And also, just let me know what are your favorite Stephen King movies. Also, let me know if you want me to do a follow-up on this video where I talk about my least favorite Stephen King movies, which yeah, that'll be a fun discussion. Let me know if you're interested in that. And yeah, that's about it. That's all I got for you today. Thank you guys so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and subscribe or stay subscribed, I should say, for more content. And what else do I say on here? Bookish Drummer Discord down below, where you can check out the Stephen King book club. We've already read Under the Dome, The Shining, and Doctor Sleep in 2024. But we've got a whole schedule for 2025 laid out, starting with different seasons in January, which 3 of those novellas got turned into movies. Shawshank Redemption, Apt Pupil, which probably a lot of people haven't seen, and The Body, which got turned into Stand By Me. So we're going to be doing that in January. So Bookish Drummer Discord down below if you want to check out the Stephen King book club. I've also got my Patreon link down below if you want to go support me there for as little as $1 a month. $1 a month can get you access to some stuff. And my Amazon wish list if you want to buy me a book. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.